Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, well, thanks to everybody for showing up to the Balmoral School, for signing up for the week. We had a week last week that was very successful, our first time doing this on a virtual platform, and I think it was very successful. So, the purpose of today, you're going to get a series of 3 workshops from 4 of the instructors. So, the first one is going to be me on maintenance, and then following that, we'll have Robert Matheson's going to do one on reeds and reed manipulation, chanter reeds. And then later tonight, Bruce Gandy and George Balderos are going to do one on tuning and drone reeds. Okay, so the purpose of all of this is to give you all just like a general kind of some education on what you need to have here for tomorrow. For the first class, we want everyone to have a bagpipe that's operational. So it's a good idea to do a lot of the checks, the stuff that I'm covering and the other 3 instructors are going to cover, and make sure that your bagpipe's operational. And we're going to be able to get down to the important stuff, down to the play, starting tomorrow morning. All right, so the other thing I'm going to say, I'm going to cover, there's a various levels of experience in the room here. We've got everyone from people that have only been playing a few months right up to people that have been playing for many years and are quite experienced. So I'll be covering a lot of stuff that you already know, but hopefully everybody in the room here will learn something from the workshop that I'm about to give. All right, so first things first, the Great Highland Bagpipe. All right, this is my set of pipes, so we'll just go over the various parts. Some people might know exactly how they work. So the first big thing, you've got the drones. You've got 2 tenor drones and a bass drone. Okay. We have the main part of the bagpipe, the chanter. That's where we play our melody. Okay. There's 4 reeds in a bagpipe. You've got the chanter reed in here, and then you've got a single reed in each of the drones. Okay. We've got our blowpipe and our piece. That's where we blow into. Okay. And inside of that, there's a valve that stops the air going back into your mouth. And then finally, it wouldn't be a bagpipe without a bag. And I'm going to cover a little bit about the various different types of bags. So this is our reservoir of air, and all our reeds get controlled by this reservoir of air that are inside the pipe bag. Now, the most important thing about a pipe bag is that it's airtight. All right. If your bag is leaking, either at one of the joints or it goes into the stocks, it's going to be much harder to play, and you're going to be wasting a lot of energy and a lot of effort because you've got a leak. So the first thing you want to do, no matter what different type of bag you have, you want to make sure that it's airtight. Okay. So there's various different types of bags. So the first, I guess, traditional type of bag, this is a sheepskin bag. So, about a year ago, this was running around a field and going ba-ba, eating grass. Sorry for any vegetarians in the room. So we've got a sheepskin bag. Now, how we make that airtight is we need to season the inside of the bag. So this is some airtight seasoning. There's some other brands out there. Airtight's typically usually recognized as the best. So you season the inside of the bag to make it airtight if you have a natural skin bag. And there's lots of different materials used in natural skin bags. Goat skin, cowhide, elk, but so any of those materials, if it's a natural skin bag, you want to make sure it's seasoned in the inside so that it's airtight. And then we'll have the synthetic bags. Now, I'll cover how to tie the stocks in just briefly. All right, so this is a Gore-Tex bag. Okay, so this bag has a zip on it. Okay, now your bag may or may not have a zip. So if your bag doesn't have a zip, the stocks need to be inserted in through the chanter compartment and then push through. I'll just demonstrate. This one has a zip, so it makes it a little bit easier to tie the stocks on or to insert the stocks. So you just get the stock, this is the bass drum, and you just find the opening, the hole, and just push it through. And you be quite aggressive, they're quite sturdy, all of these pipe bags. You just push it through until it gets to the correct spot, which is at the bottom. Okay, and that is it secured there. Now, there's lots of different types of bags, and I'll cover the ones I have here, probably 6 or 7 of them. Okay, so what I would do as a kind of extra security measure, after I've inserted all the stocks, is get some self-amalgamating tape, which is a kind of rubberized, stretchy tape, and just kind of double secure the stocks into the bag. All right. Now, how you test the bag if it's airtight? Obviously, you want to insert the blowpipe, and then you need the stock corks. Wine corks work very good if you are a connoisseur of wine. You've got some, instead of throwing them in the trash, you can keep your wine corks, and they work pretty well. So you want to cork up all the remaining 4 stocks once you've the bag tied on. Obviously, it goes without saying, if your bag has a zip, make sure the zip's closed. Okay, and then you just want to inflate the bag. And that should be absolutely airtight. And a good way to test it is just hold it and squeeze it under your arm for maybe like a minute, and it shouldn't be leaking any air. Okay? If after about a minute it kind of deflates a bit, so if you're left with something like that and it's all floppy and you're able to squeeze it and it's clearly lost air, you need to then check it. So how you check it, inflate it again, hold it up to your ear, check along the zip, along the seam, along where the stocks meet the bag. Also check that the valve isn't leaking, the blowpipe. The bag actually needs to be tight, but the valve's leaking. So just do all your checks and make sure that your bag is airtight. If it's not airtight, your bagpipe's going to be much harder to blow, and you're wasting a lot of energy and effort when, So you want to make sure your bag is airtight. Now, on a sheepskin bag, so there's several different ways to tie stocks on depending on what type of bag you have. So that's a synthetic bag, a Camor bag. There's various different ones. This is an older version. This is just exactly the same thing, but it's green. Okay, same process. This is a moose bag that's from Australia. It has slightly different grommets, but same process for tying in. This is a Ross bag from Australia. Now, with this type, there's just rubber cups that the drones go into, and they're quite loose, and you need to tighten them then with O-rings. So the stock goes in, you put the O-ring over the cup, and then you tighten it with a screwdriver, and that seals the rubber cup to the drone. Okay. And if you have a bag cover, it's always a good idea, if you're using these O-rings or Jubilee clips, sometimes they're called, you want to put a bit of tape over them so they don't rip your bag cover. All right. And then we kind of get a hybrid kind of section of bags. So I talked about the sheepskin bag that I have in my pipes. Well, this one is a sheepskin bag that has a zip on it from Jack Lee up in Vancouver. All right, so this one you would need to season the inside. It has these suction cups that the same way you would need the O-rings to secure that on. And you would need to actually tie the chanter stock for this one and the other ones that I'm about to show you. This is a Ganaway pipe bag from New Zealand. So it's made of cowhide. It has a zip. the same rubber suction cups. You need the O-rings for that, and you actually physically tie the neck on. And finally, another Jack Lee one. So this is kind of a sheepskin bag in the inside, and then there's an outer material that seals it. Okay. Generally, you need to still season this to get the sound, but effectively you need to season it less because it's airtight. There's an outer cover on it that seals the bag. Okay. So a sheepskin bag, how do you tie that on? Well, I'm just going to cover that briefly. And you can use these clips for doing the synthetic synthetic bag on. But if you have a sheepskin bag, you'll need to physically tie it, so you need some tie-in cord. All right, and the best way to do it is wrap it. I always double it up, just makes it more secure. And then if you get a plank of wood, it also comes in handy when you get cheeky students. You can hit them with it, you know. So you get a plank of wood, wrap it around, double the thickness of it just to strengthen it, and then you physically stand on the plank of wood, and you get the tension by pulling the stock in the bag up, and that secures, and you tie in the sheepskin bag with that. It's quite a lengthy process, so if you need to tie a natural skin bag on, it's going to take you probably at least a couple of hours to do it. It's quite a lengthy process. Right, so that's all I have on pipe bags and making sure they're airtight. I mentioned it briefly about you want to make sure that the valve in your bagpipe is not sucking back. And say that when you squeeze the bag, there's not air coming back into your mouth. That's a common kind of problem that a lot of people overlook. I've even known people to have to go and buy another bag, you know, to think that their bag's leaking. They go and buy another bag and it's still leaking, and at the end of the day, it's a $5 fix. You know, they need a new valve in their blue pipe. And I'll just show you up close. There's various different types of valves. All right, here's a collection. The kind of traditional ones use leather. You could even make them yourself by a little piece of copper and just an old pair of shoes or something. You know, you used to be able to make them. Typically, they're made of rubber these days. All right, so you've got your typical flapper valve, you know, rubber one, and then here's another example. Here, it's this one's built into the actual blowpipe. And then these two here, you see there isn't any valve at all. That's because it's built into the actual blowpipe itself. This is an Airstream one, and this is a R.G. Hardy one. Chrysler, I think this one is. Anyway, they're all different brands, but effectively they do the same thing. Now, what do you do if your valve is sticking or leaking air? Well, sometimes if they get wet, or sometimes if they've completely dried out, you need to just, an easy fix is just some chapstick, like what you put in your lips, a little bit of that, and you don't want to cake it on, just rub a little bit on the inside and the outside of the valve, just to get a good seal. A little bit of Vaseline, petroleum jelly or whatever, it works quite well as well. So there's a couple of things you can do to fix the valve. All right. On a kind of just on the blowpipe as well, before I move on. A lot of people these days, they're very conscious about their teeth, and you can just get some rubber tubing from any general hardware store, and typically just cut it, and if you put it in hot water, it'll slide onto the tip of your mouthpiece, and that'll save your teeth a little bit from biting down on the hard plastic. Some people play it without, some people play with. It's totally up to you, but a little bit of rubber tubing can go over the tip of the mouthpiece, and that's a little bit easier on your teeth whenever you play. All right, so that is about the bags and blowpipes. I'll maybe just stop here for a second to see if there's any questions that on anything I've covered so far.
Well, nobody's raised their hands or typed anything yet. I imagine they're processing, but why don't everybody take a moment and just consider what's been gone over so far, see if you come up with any questions, and if you do, raise your hand over using that participants feature there. Let's see. No,
Okay, so I'll just
no.
move on to the next section. It also related to bags, but yeah, if you have a question, just type it in and Sean can then notify me if there's a question.
Yep.
I'll be happy to answer. And what I will say, and I think Robert said it earlier, there's no stupid questions. Like, don't think that you're going to sound unintelligent or something by asking a question. The way you're going to learn throughout this week, you need to participate and ask the questions. Really happy to answer. Sometimes there's very simple things that we just miss out because there's a lot to cover in a topic like maintenance. So um, don't be frightened to ask any question. Right. So the next kind of thing I want to talk about is moisture control. It's a mouth blowing instrument. So when we play the bagpipes, our human breath is warm. It goes into the bag, it condenses, it forms condensation moisture, and your reeds will get wet after a period of playing. So um, typically, pipers need some form of moisture control within their bag. Now, the, the simplest form of moisture control, and I'll just show you on my pipes, is you can just attach a tube that goes to the back of the bag so that the bag, the air goes in and condenses in the tube, and then you can empty the moisture out of the tube before it gets to the reeds. All right, so I'll show you this particular model with the sheepskin bag has a split stalk. So you can see there that there's a tube, and again, you can buy these from any hardware store. You don't need to go to a piping store to buy things like this. Just a clear plastic tube, and the moisture condenses in that and sends it to the back of the bag, and then you can dump it out into a bin or onto the grass if you're at a Highland Games or something like that. Preferably not onto your nice clean carpet. I always have to shout at the students for dumping their water traps on my office floor. Okay, so that's the simplest form. The Canmore bags these days will come with this simple bottle trap. So they're just basically the same idea. There's a tube and it goes into this bottle and there's a sponge in it. Now, after playing for several times, I would recommend you want to get a packet of these sponges. They're just disposable, like what you use for washing your dishes or whatever. If you're playing a bottle trap like this, you want to keep changing that sponge because one, for hygiene reasons, you don't want your kind of germs building up and an ecosystem starting to grow in the sponge. So you're going to be breathing that in, for example. So you want to change the sponge every so often, and it also loses its effectiveness, just like your dishcloth at home. If it gets wet and dries and wet and dry all over and over again, it's going to lose its ability to absorb moisture. It'll turn hard and that. So just kind of common sense. You want to look after your hygiene with that. And then there's lots of other more advanced forms of moisture control. This is the Ross canister system, where basically, you have a canister and then a series of 4 tubes that go to the 4 reeds. And there's other versions of this as well. There's ones that just connect, the little cartridges that connect directly into the drones and stuff like that. There's lots of different brands out there. So basically, they're all the same. They go through a canister or some form of body of desiccant. So there's desiccant inside the canister. The air goes through and it dries the air out and before it hits the reeds. And that'll get you a longer playing time out of your instrument. Okay, I'm pretty lucky in that I'm a pretty dry blower and I don't have much problems with with reeds getting wet and stuff. I typically don't play any form of moisture control, but I'm one of the few people that is lucky in that regard. Most people need some form of moisture control.
So there is a question that's come in,
Yep.
and it kind of ties in with the subject of moisture control, so perhaps you can expound on the initial answer. The question is from Janine. She says, so just to be certain, if I have a synthetic bag, I believe you're saying it does not need to be seasoned. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. Never put seasoning into a synthetic bag. Um, the last few options would be the exceptions. You would know what material it's made of if it's one of these hybrid bags that has an animal skin in the inside, like any of these three, the Ganaway or one of these two ones by Jack Lee. Then yes, you would need the seasoning uh, for to make it airtight. But any synthetic bag, any of the other models I showed you, no, they're made airtight and you don't need to season them. Another question that I might have left out that I have witnessed one person do this by mistake and it absolutely destroyed a bag was somebody poured airtight seasoning and rubbed it onto the outside of the bag. The seasoning always goes to the inside of the bag. All right, so yes, that's the answer to the question. Don't ever season a synthetic bag.
And Glenna has a question. Go ahead, Glenna.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Sean. Just a short question. This might apply more to the Reeds lecture tonight, but what would be some signs of water damage in chanter and drone reeds?
Okay, well, if you're playing synthetic reeds, the first sign is they're going to stop or they're going to start like making gurgly noises, or you'll get to know your own instrument. If suddenly they start making weird sounds and or even stop, or the other extreme they open up, or something like that, then they're getting wet. And the easiest way to check just open up just take the drone out of and just check and see if it's wet. And the easiest way to dry your drone reeds off, especially if they're synthetic, just leave them to air dry. Take them out of the stocks. I would never take the reeds out of the reed seats, but just leave them to air dry for 10 or 15 minutes. And then that brings me on to the next bit. You can get these soft brushes, but make sure they're soft and make sure they're clean. And if you've got, say you've just done a 2-hour band practice or the Pittsburgh St. Patrick's Day parade or something and it's really cold outside, well, there's likely going to be a lot of condensation in your drones. So you want to just brush that and remove the moisture. Okay, so that'll give you some extra playing time as well. So if your pipes get wet and you want to practice some more, you can brush them out, leave the reeds out to air dry, and then you'll be able to go back and play for longer, the next time. It's also a very good thing to do after every band practice or after every time you've practiced. Just air dry your pipes, check your drums, check the inside. You'll find like the top section of your bass and the top section of your tenors, sometimes there's some moisture in there, so you can just remove that just with a little soft brush, and that'll. If you put your pipes away after they've got soaking wet, it can lead to problems like if you end up cracking your instrument and stuff like that. So if you take care of your bagpipe, it'll take care of you. To follow up with the rest of your question, the chanter reed, which is cane, and it would be the same for if you're playing cane drone reeds. You want to look after them because at the end of it, it's a natural product, it's wood, it's bamboo cane. So if your chanter reed gets soaking wet and you leave it in the bag, it's going to decay, it's going to rot. You might have seen some chanter reeds starting to turn black, or I've even seen some that have grown beards and all sorts of stuff because people just leave them in the bag. So it's always good to have a reed protector, just a dry stock. There's lots of different versions of them, just a kind of cap for the chanter, and that'll allow the reed to dry out a little bit. Another tip, if your reed is absolutely saturated, soaking wet, I would let it air dry for 2 minutes before you put it into a cap. It's the same thing, if you're putting it into a rubber or a plastic cap, and it's soaking wet, it's a natural product, it's not breathing in it. It could, again, decay just as it would in the bag. Not as quick, but, you know, so let it air dry for a minute or two. If it's really wet, if it's just a little bit damp, you can just put it in the dry stock, that'll be fine. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question there, Glenna. So back to the whole concept of your instrument being airtight.
We actually just had another question come up,
Yep.
or I should say, Mark Latham has got his hand up. So
Uh-huh.
go ahead, Mark.
Yep.
You're gonna have to unmute yourself there, Mark.
Right. Sorry. On the moisture issue, what is the best relative humidity to maintain, let's say, a chanter reed at?
In my experience, I only know this because of the Eurochism reed protector, the toe protector. It seems to be 84, and that seems to be pretty good because when you put your chanter in your pipes, there's a lot of moisture around because you're breathing into the bag and all of that. So that seems to be the optimum kind of humidity.
What is Jory's chanter tone protector reed right now?
84.
84?
So you can buy the little packets for it. They have different numbers on them, and so if you live in a particularly, well, you're in Houston, which is quite humid, so 84 is probably the one you would want for that particular system. I know they make, they're actually humidor things for cigars. That's what they are, you know, the little packets. And you can get them at various different humidity levels. So I know they have one at 72, and you can go. So if you live in the middle of the Arizona desert or something, you can get a lower one because it's going to be more close to the natural environment you're going to be playing in. You know.
Cheers. Thank you.
But that one seems to be 84. All right. So, So next, we're talking about airtight, making sure your bag. You want the rest of the instrument all to be airtight as well. And how we do that is with hemp. Okay. Now, there's two main types of hemp. Right? You've waxed hemp. All right. And you've unwaxed hemp. All right. So this has been pre-coated in wax. Typically, the waxed hemp is black and the unwaxed hemp is yellow, but it's not necessarily true anymore because they're now making waxed yellow hemp and unwaxed black hemp. And even Lincoln Hilton out in Australia, I saw it, he's got pink and purple hemp and all sorts of different colours, red and blue and everything. So I think it looks a little bit strange, but yeah, you can get lots of different colours of it these days. Now, I'm just going to go over hemping. Now, personally, there's lots of various schools of thought on this, but the important thing is that it's sealed and it's tight. You know, everything's secure. For the blowpipe and the chanter, things that are constantly coming in and out, I always use the pre-waxed black hemp. I think that's good for the blowpipe and the chanter. For the drones, I find personally that the black waxed hemp, it compresses, especially your tuning slides that you're moving all the time. It compresses a lot and it turns into almost like a kind of like rubbery kind of texture, and you can get problems with slippage and stuff like that. Now, the big thing that you want to avoid when you're hemping is what I call when the hemp starts turning on itself. So, for example, if I'm tuning my tenor drone here, and I'm trying to move it up or down, and the hemp's spinning so you're not actually doing any tuning, the hemp's just actually spinning on itself. And how we avoid that is, I'm going to show you how I would hemp a particular joint. Now for the drones, as I say, I find it's best to use unwaxed hemp, but for the first couple of layers, that you're going to put in. Typically, it's 4 to 5 layers. You need to put a hemp on to your joints so that they're sealed. For the first 2, I would run it through some cobbler's wax, and that helps it stick to the actual joint. Okay, so I would warm it up slightly with my hands. The heat of my hands will kind of, and just rub it on a little bit on the joint you're going to do. And then I get my little Scottish friend here, and just drop the hemp into a little container. It means it doesn't run across the floor, and it's easier to work with. Okay, and then you just want to run the hemp, the unwaxed hemp, through the cobbler's wax. Okay, and I'll want to get it a little bit. So that looks quite good. And then just get a little bit of leather, and you can rub that in. And we'll try and take it up to the camera to hopefully show you the difference. Might be hard to see, but so you'll see that. It's maybe hard to see. You can see it maybe against my shirt there. So this bit here has been waxed, right? You can see it's more black, and this part hasn't been yet. All right, so that's unwaxed. All right, so this is a lot stickier. And that will take it to the drone. And then you want to just be very neat with it, and you want to go put a layer on, and then the thread right next to it, and right next to it, and right next to it. And you want to do this, and it'll take you a little bit of time, but if you do it really neatly, and you want to put some tension on it to start with, so that it takes to the joint and it sticks. And if you do it this way, put 2 layers on, and it would be the same up here, 2 layers on with it waxed, and then finish up with it unwaxed. I think that helps absorb some moisture as well, and kind of an extra little moisture control. That'll help absorb some of the moisture, and your reeds won't get as wet just as quickly. So it'll help soak up some of the moisture in the stalks. Now, a couple of important things when hemping. You want to make sure that all your stalk joints here, anything that goes into the bag, you want to make sure they're pretty tight. It should need to be. It's quite difficult to move. You don't want it so tight that you need to be like an Olympic weightlifter to try and move it, because then what's going to happen once you play? It's going to swell up slightly with the moisture, and it can actually end up splitting your instrument. But you want it pretty tight and pretty secure. The drone joints, a good kind of, you should be able to move it quite freely with 2 fingers and a thumb. All right, so you want to have it quite loose enough that you can turn it just with 2 fingers and a thumb. And absolutely, when you move it here, it shouldn't move down here. So if you're tuning and it moves up, moves out of the stock, the drone moves out of the stock, that means that this isn't tight enough. Okay, so just a little bit about hemping there, but the first 2 layers, doing it neatly with cobbler's wax. If you do that, it'll last for at least 5 years. So if you do it properly once, you're set for 5 years, and it'll look after you. If you just put unwaxed hemp on loosely and it's all every direction, it's going to end up spitting on you, and you're going to have to keep replacing it over and over again. So if you do something properly, it lasts a lot longer. So a little bit about hemping. Okay. Right. So we'll talk a little bit about chanters, chanter reeds, drone reeds, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail just because, Robert's going to be talking a lot about chanter reeds in the next presentation.
We've just had a hand come up, Andrew.
Yep.
So Phil, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Okay, so this may be a silly question and maybe ahead of myself. With the hemping, most of the guys, most of the guys at the firehouse like to use Teflon tape.
Okay.
Is that something that
Do they put, yeah, so do they put the Teflon tape on top of the hemp, or do they only use the Teflon tape?
some do put it on top, some do not?
Um, Personally, I don't use Teflon tape.
Okay.
I think it's okay if you hemp up and you only put a little bit at the top. What it actually does is thread your drone. So like, first of all, I would never ever put it down in these joints. Anything that goes into the bag, I wouldn't use Teflon or
Okay.
PTFE tape or whatever. I think it's what it's called sometimes. So a little bit around the tuning pins, just that'll help thread it and give you some very fine adjustments that you can make. So if you turn it clockwise, it'll go down. If you turn it anti-clockwise, or you guys counterclockwise, it goes the other way. So I think it's okay, but the way I showed you with the cobbler's wax and the unwaxed finish, I think is the best for the drones. Black wax hemp, I definitely wouldn't put this on a blowpipe or a chanter or any of the stocks. I don't think that's a good thing. But so that's really my answer to your question.
All right, well, thank you.
Sure. All right, so right, so yes, so Robert's going to be doing a presentation about reeds and chanters, just briefly about chanters and chanter reeds. You want to make sure that your reed is in securely into the reed seat, and that the reed is nice and straight, both like this way and that way, so both head on and side on. If it's sitting kind of all lopsided and too high out of the reed seat, one, it's going to leak air, it's not going to sound very good, and guess what? Whenever you put that into a stock, you're going to damage the reed. It's going to hit the sides. So you want to just kind of common sense on that one. Make sure it's in securely. Some reed seats are threaded in the sense of like when you twist them in, it catches threads, and that's how you raise and sink the reed. This chanter in particular is not threaded, so you just add or remove hemp to adjust it. But the important thing is you want it in securely. Another tip: never handle the blades with your fingers. If you're grabbing a reed, grab it by the hemp part. It's a good practice to have. They're kind of fragile. You don't want to damage the cane in the top. So never. And if you have a chanter, you don't want to pick it up by the reed or anything like that. So another thing. So how we do our fine adjustments on the chanter? How we tune our individual notes. We use electrical tape. All right, there's various different types, different sizes. The important thing is, after so long, the tape will start getting a bit sticky and it'll lose its adhesive and it'll start getting all messy and slidey. Two things that's going to be uncomfortable to play, and goes without saying, if your tape is all sliding all over your holes, it's not going to stay in tune. So it's important that you change your tape. And the best way, if you're a kind of amateur and you're not that good at tuning or not that experienced with tuning, the best thing to do is just get a small piece of tape and cover the rest of the hole that you need to change the tape with. So like cover the rest of the hole, so then you rip the old bit off and you can put the new piece of tape back exactly where the old piece was. That's a good way of doing it. So another thing about, make sure, and this happens a lot too in the summer, whenever you're traveling in your pipe's in a hot car, or you're going to the Highland Games and you're playing and it's 95 degrees outside. You can get a lot of the heat in the sun will melt the adhesive on your tape. So make sure you change that regularly. Okay. Drone reeds. There's lots of different drone reeds on the market these days. again, Bruce and George will be talking more about this tonight, but just to a little introduction to the typical cane drone reeds. These are basses and tenors, and then there's lots of different synthetic. I would imagine most of you play synthetic drone reeds these days. So there's lots of different shapes, sizes, and colors of drone reeds these days. There's just a selection of 6 different reeds there, all different colors and shapes. They all work off the same principle. You have a tongue that vibrates, and if you close the tongue down with the bridle, that'll make it easier and sharper. If you lengthen the tongue by pulling the bridle, opening the tongue up, then it's going to make it flatter and harder. And it's important that you get the reed set up to the strength that you play off the chanter. And I think Robert and Bruce and George will cover more on that later. In terms of drone reeds, it goes back to the old thing I was talking about, everything being airtight. You want to make sure that when the reed goes into the reed seat, it's snug, right? Now, especially with cane reeds, you want to always handle them like this and make sure they're secure, right? If you start wiggling it like this with your palm of your hand and stuff, you can actually bend the tongue and damage that, especially with cane reeds, you know. So you want to always handle it kind of down here and make sure they're in securely. I'm sure some of you have experienced this. If your drone reed's not in securely enough, it can fall out and go into the bag. So you want to make sure that it's in securely. And a little tip is if you leave a little strand of hemp and leave it onto where the drone goes into the stock, you know, that'll trap it so that if it does fall out, it'll still be dangling by the little thread here. So that's just a little kind of tip you can do to make sure your drones don't fall out into the bag.
We've had a question about that.
Yes.
Janine says, I've actually had drone reeds drop out into the inside of my bag. What does that mean? What should I be doing better and fixing?
You need to put more hemp on the reeds. For synthetic reeds, I typically use black wax hemp, and you just put it into, just make sure there's enough hemp on it so it's secure. And yeah, it's like anything. If you don't play your pipes for a long time and they all dry out, you're going to get things like that, like the reeds start becoming loose. So if you haven't played your pipes in a long time, you want to check everything's nice and snug and tight, everything's efficient, everything's airtight. Yeah, so just basically the simple solution is just add more hemp. That tip I talked about where you just want to have a little strand of hemp on the reed. So that add a little bit so we can just leave a little bit of hanging here so that if it does fall out, it's going to dangle by that thread. You know? Just a little tip. So yes, important to not let the reeds go into the bag. It's not the end of the world if it is in a synthetic bag. It goes in, you can fish it out easily, and it's not too bad. It's an absolute nightmare if you're playing a sheepskin bag or a cowhide bag, a natural skin bag, because it gets covered in seasoning and then it's all, you know, it's never really the same again. You can wash it all you want and stuff, but it gets sticky, and then the tongues are quite fragile, and you probably all need a new set of reeds, or a new reed anyway, if you get one that falls into a sheepskin bag. Yeah. And then another, if you're not that confident with tuning, there's tuners out there available on the market these days, you know, that can help you. There's even some smartphone apps, Android and iPhone and all of that you can get that help you with tuning. It gives you some green lights if it's in tune, and red lights the other side if it's sharp or flat, or, you know, that can be a good tool to have as well. Some of the most basic ones are only about $10, and some of the apps that you can get for tuning are similar kind of cost. So we're not talking about a lot of money. You can get the fancy ones for tuning drones that are way up in the kind of $600 mark as well. I don't think anyone here, unless you're a pipe major of a band, would be even something like that. All right, so I think that is about me covered. Just if there's any other questions, please just ask. And
There was
then,
sort of a question there.
yeah,
Janine asked, she says, okay, but that white tuner can only tune the low A and the drones, or is that wrong? I downloaded a tuning app to do the rest of the chanter.
you can, yeah, well, basically, you can use this to tune, you just would, as you play, you would tune it to, you would set it to whatever pitch your low A is at, and then you could just use the green light as you go up the notes of the scale. So yes, you can use it. Some of the more bagpipe specific apps and bagpipe specific tuners will probably give you a little bit better or a little bit easier to use to tune the actual notes of your chanter. But I mean, I'm a great believer that the best tuner in the world is your ears. You know, you can learn to use your ears and learn to teach yourself what sounds in tune and what sounds out of tune. Then that's the best kind of tuner. But yes, you can use these, but yeah, some of the more specific bagpipe ones are going to be a little bit more user friendly, yeah, for sure.
Cool. Any other questions before we call it there? I don't see any hands going up.
Okay. So it's a good, just to finish up, it would be a good idea, if you haven't already done it while I've been talking here, to just check your bagpipe out, make sure your bagpipes are tight, cork the bag up, blow it up, make sure there's no leaks, make sure all your hemp is neatly done and the hemp's not spinning on the joints. Make sure nothing's too tight, nothing's too loose. Make sure your bagpipe's efficient and make sure it's in good working order. Now, Robert's going to go over chanter reads, so he can hopefully help you all make sure that you've got a reed that's comfortable and you're able to play it and it's not too hard or it's not too easy and squealing and stuff like that. And then George and Bruce will cover drones and tuning tonight. So hopefully everyone, the whole goal of this is everyone shows up tomorrow morning with a bagpipe that works and we're able to start classes. So hopefully you can make sure your bagpipe's all operational tonight so that we can get some work done throughout the week. All right, so I think if that's me, I'll hand back to Sean and he'll introduce Robert for the next presentation.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.